It was the third night after our wedding when I heard it again. The rain was tapping against the bedroom window, a steady, almost polite rhythm, the kind that makes you want to sink deeper into the warmth of the bed. I lay there in the dark, eyes fixed on the faint ceiling outline above, the smell of damp air and her faint perfume lingering in the space between us. She was turned away from me, her breathing soft, even, except for the way her lips moved. At first it was just a murmur, the kind you'd miss if you weren't listening. But I was listening. I'd been listening every night. Then it came. The name. Not mine. Never mine. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. It was like hearing a stranger speaking in my house. A quiet trespass, slipping into the shadows of the room. This wasn't new. Since the day we returned from the reception, she had been somewhere else. Cold, but not cruel. Absent, but polite. The way a hotel concierge might treat you. Professional, courteous, and untouched. Every attempt I'd made to close the distance between us was met with the same smile that never reached her eyes and a murmured excuse. I'm tired. I just need time. 2 weeks of this. 2 weeks of eating in silence. 2 weeks of that name showing up in conversation like an uninvited guest, slipped in as casually as if she were talking about the weather. That name had started to feel like a ghost haunting the walls, hovering at the edge of my hearing even when she wasn't speaking it. I turned onto my back, staring into the dark. Were you ever here with me? The next evening I tried again. I'd made her tea the way she liked it. Too sweet for my taste, but that was how she drank it before bed. I set it on the coffee table in front of her. She thanked me, eyes still on the television, not even glancing up. Her fingers toyed absently with the edge of her scarf. She hadn't worn ski as much before the wedding. Now they seemed like armor. I sat beside her, close enough to feel the heat from her body, close enough that if I moved an inch, I could rest my hand on her knee. But I didn't. I waited. When she didn't shift toward me, I spoke. Quietly. Because I didn't trust my voice. Were you ever mine? She froze. Not visibly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. The teacup stopped halfway to her lips. The television's reflection flickered in her eyes. And then she took a sip, set the cup down, and said nothing. The silence stretched between us, thick as wet rope. I wanted to ask again. I wanted to raise my voice, force her to look at me, tell her how it felt to share a bed with someone whose heart was somewhere else. But something stopped me, the sudden, cold certainty that I already knew the answer. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and stayed there until I heard the soft click of the bedroom door closing. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room, the TV off, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sigh of the wind outside. My phone lay on the coffee table, screen dim. I scrolled through our old messages, the ones from before the wedding, when her words had warmth, when she sent me pictures of sunsets and songs she said reminded her of me. I tried to remember how I'd felt reading them back then, the way they'd pulled me toward her like a tide. But reading them now, it was like looking at photographs of someone else's life. On the table beside my phone was the manila envelope, the draft of a legal petition I'd never thought I'd be holding this soon. Just paper, just words, but it felt heavier than anything in the room. I ran my fingers along its edge, the way you might test the sharpness of a blade. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time since either wedding, I realized I wasn't listening for her breathing anymore. When I think about the beginning, I don't picture fireworks or cinematic moments. I picture a quiet corner of my cousin's engagement party, where she sat alone with a glass of juice and a half smile, watching the crowd as if she was in it, but not of it. That was the first time I saw Aisha. I'd been making small talk with an uncle I barely knew when my eyes caught hers across the room. Not in the romantic way, more in the way you notice a painting that doesn't match the rest of the gallery. She was dressed modestly, in a deep blue that seemed to absorb the light instead of reflect it. When I approached, she didn't leap into conversation. She was polite, measured, her words deliberate. Some people might have called it distant. I called it intriguing. I'd always been drawn to people who seemed to carry a private weather inside them. Over the next few weeks, I found reasons to see her again. Family dinners, small gatherings, even a charity event she mentioned in passing. She never sought me out, but she never turned me away either. Her guardedness felt like a puzzle I was meant to solve. When she spoke, she had this habit of glancing away as if choosing her words from a shelf in her mind. I took it as thoughtfulness. I didn't realize it might have been avoidance. I told myself I was lucky. She was beautiful in a way that made people second-guess themselves. Not loud beauty, but quiet and certain. Intelligent, too, the kind who read books that most people only reference to sound clever. There was a sadness about her, faint but constant, like the smell of rain in the air. I thought I could be the one to change that. When the idea of marriage surfaced, it wasn't a grand proposal. It was a conversation, measured, sensible, almost businesslike. But there had been a softness in her eyes that day, and I mistook it for love. I made changes for her, turned down a promotion that would have sent me to another city, chose to stay close to hers, telling myself that home wasn't a place but a person. I never said it out loud, but deep down I believed that kind of sacrifice was proof of love. Her parents welcomed me warmly. Her father shook my hand with genuine respect. Her mother served me tea and told me stories from her own early marriage. But among my friends, there were comments. "She's complicated," one of them said, careful with his tone. Another asked, "You sure she's ready for this?" I brushed it all aside. People talk. People envy. I had made my choice. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur of preparations. I remember the day we went to choose our rings. I picked something simple. Gold, plain, nothing ostentatious. She hesitated longer, turning one band over and over in her hand, as though the weight of it mattered more than the design. Our wedding day was quiet. We kept it small, as she preferred. I remember standing beside her during the ceremony, our hands linked, and noticing how cold her fingers felt. I told myself it was just nerves. Even during the reception, her attention seemed to drift. She'd smile at people, laugh when appropriate, but every now and then her gaze would wander, as though she were searching for someone who wasn't there. I didn't ask. I didn't want to spoil the day with doubt. A week later, as we unpacked in the apartment, I noticed she'd brought very few personal things. Most of her clothes, some books, a framed picture of her parents, but no childhood keepsakes, no old photos of friends. The shelves looked empty. One evening, as she sat reading, I caught her expression in the lamplight. Not unhappy, but not present, like she was somewhere else entirely. I remember reaching for her hand. She gave it to me, but her fingers didn't curl back around mine. That night, I remembered something my father had told me years before. We were sitting in the backyard, talking about relationships. He'd said, "If she still looks over your shoulder while you're holding her, she's not looking at you." At the time, I laughed. It sounded like something out of an old novel. Now, weeks into my marriage, those words had a way of returning in the quiet moments. And when they did, I felt that same coldness in my chest that I'd felt on our wedding day. I didn't know it yet, but the story had already been written long before I stepped into it. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays used to be my favorite, close enough to the weekend to feel light, far enough from Monday to forget the weight of the week. But this one had been heavy from the moment I woke up. Aisha had been unusually quiet at breakfast. Not the soft, thoughtful quiet I once liked about her. This was sharp-edged silence, the kind you can cut yourself on if you try to break it. She ate quickly, barely meeting my eyes, then disappeared into the bedroom. By evening, the apartment felt airless. I'd cooked dinner, her favourite, or what she once said was her favourite, but she said she wasn't hungry. She sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving slow and deliberate, as if savouring each word she read. I tried to tell myself it was work. I tried to tell myself 100 things. It was past midnight when I woke to the faint sound of her voice. At first I thought she was talking in her sleep again, but when I sat up, the bed was empty. I followed the soft hum of her words to the kitchen. The light over the stove was on, casting her in a warm, almost cinematic glow, but the look on her face wasn't warm at all. She was leaning against the counter, one arm crossed over her chest, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, intimate in a way I'd never heard it with me. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard his name, the same name I'd been hearing in my head for weeks. And then I heard her laugh, quiet, breathy, the kind that lives in the space between people who share a secret. I don't remember deciding to move. My feet were just suddenly there, standing in the doorway. She saw me and froze. The expression that crossed her face wasn't guilt. It was irritation, like I'd interrupted something important. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She frowned. "You were listening. You said his name." She crossed her arms. "You shouldn't eavesdrop." I almost laughed. That was her defense. Not you're wrong. Not you misunderstood. Just a neat little pivot to make me the intruder. "Who was it, Aisha?" Her eyes flicked away. A movement so small I might have missed it if I didn't already know her patterns. "No one," she said, and brushed past me. It was the smallest push of her shoulder against mine, but it felt like a wall coming down between us. A wall that had been there all along, only now I could see it. I didn't follow her back to bed. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood until the lines blurred. I thought about the man whose name she said like a prayer. I thought about the way she never looked at me, the way she must have looked at him. And for the first time, I let myself admit something I'd been avoiding. I had been fighting for a place in her life that she never intended to give me. The next days blurred together. I stopped going to work. The emails piled up. The phone rang and I let it ring. I barely ate. I'd wake in the middle of the night and just sit, staring at the dark until it shifted into the pale light of morning. The mirror became an enemy. Each time I passed it, I'd see a man I didn't quite recognize. Shoulders slumped, eyes dulled, hair unkempt. I'd always taken pride in keeping myself together. Now I couldn't even find the energy to shave. One morning, standing there, looking at that stranger in my own reflection, I realized something. This wasn't just her betrayal anymore. It was mine, too. Every day I stayed. Every day I let myself be less than I was. I was betraying myself. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for divorce lawyers. The words, "Contact us," stared at me from the screen, daring me. My hands shook as I typed my message. Short, factual, almost cold. I didn't tell them about the name in the dark, or the phone call, or the way she never touched me anymore. I just said I needed to know my options. When I hit send, it felt like both a betrayal of my vows and the first honest thing I'd done in weeks. 2 days later, the reply came. Simple, professional, outlining the next steps. Steps toward an ending I hadn't thought would come so soon. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, the glow of the streetlight cutting a sharp line across the floor. Somewhere in the apartment, I could hear her moving, drawers opening, a cupboard door shutting, the normal sounds of a shared life. The apartment was too quiet after she left for work. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the sterile, airless quiet of a place that doesn't belong to you anymore. Every sound I made felt wrong. Even the clink of my coffee cup against the table seemed to echo in a way that made me want to apologize. I'd been living there like a ghost for weeks, sleeping on the edge of the bed, speaking only when necessary, keeping to myself as if I were a guest, overstaying my welcome. The lawyer's email was still sitting in my inbox. I'd read it a dozen times. Every time I reached the part about next steps, my stomach tightened. But that morning, I didn't just read it. I answered. It took me less than 3 sentences to set it in motion. Yes, I want to proceed. Tell me what I need to sign. I thought I'd feel relief when I hit send. Instead, I felt hollow. Packing started small. Just the things that were undeniably mine. Clothes, books, my git. I avoided the shared drawers and the framed photos on the shelves. The wedding picture on the mantel seemed to watch me as I moved around the living room. In it, we were smiling, leaning into each other, her hand on my chest. I could almost believe we were still those people. Almost. I didn't take it down. I couldn't. Instead, I turned it face down. I found a studio apartment across town. Nothing fancy. Just 4 white walls and a kitchen the size of a closet. The landlord told me the last tenant had left in a hurry. No furniture, no traces. That's what I wanted. A place with no memories, no history I'd have to scrub out. Moving day came faster than I expected. I didn't tell her until the night before. She didn't ask me to stay. She didn't even look surprised. "Is this what you want?" she said. I thought about telling her it wasn't what I wanted at all, that I wanted her to turn around and say my name the way she used to tell me she'd been wrong, to promise we could start over. But I'd already learned the truth. I wasn't going to get that. So I just said, yes. The morning I left, she was in the shower. I carried the boxes down quietly, one at a time, like I was stealing something. Maybe I was. Stealing back the pieces of myself I'd been leaving behind for months. By the time I closed the apartment door for the last time, my chest felt heavy, but my steps were steady. The new place smelled faintly of paint and dust. The walls were bare, the floor scuffed, the window cracked just enough to let in the noise from the street below. I stood there for a long moment, surrounded by cardboard boxes, listening to the hum of traffic. It didn't feel like home. It didn't feel like anything yet. That night, I slept on a mattress on the floor. No sheets, no headboard, just me and the faint light from the street lamps spilling through the blinds. For the fight, first time in months, I didn't dream about her. I woke up before sunrise, and for a strange, fleeting second, I forgot everything. Where I was, why I was here, the sharp edge of the past few weeks, and in that moment I realized something. Forgetting felt good. Not forgiveness, not healing, just forgetting, even if only for a breath. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how to fill the silence or what to do with the empty space where my life used to be. But as I made coffee in my own kitchen, in my own place, I felt a small, stubborn pulse of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was possibility. People tell you that endings are supposed to feel like doors closing, neat, final, decisive. But the truth is, they're messier than that. They don't slam shut. They drift, they stick, they creak back open when you're not looking. Sometimes you catch yourself standing in the doorway again, half in, half out, wondering if maybe, just maybe, you made a mistake. I've learned you can't live there. Not in that in-between. For months after I left, I caught myself wanting to send her a message. Something small, something harmless, Or so I told myself. How are you? Did you see the news today? Little excuses to keep a thin thread between us. But every time, I stopped. Because I finally understood something I should have known from the start. My peace wasn't going to come from her reply. It had to come from me. I used to think love was about endurance, about holding on through the storms, about proving your devotion by never letting go. But love without respect isn't devotion. It's self-erasure. And I'd been erasing myself for a long time before I even noticed. I also learned that dignity is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't win arguments or force explanations out of people who don't want to give them. Dignity is walking away without slamming the door, not because you're weak, but because you finally accepted that no amount of noise will make them hear you. My apartment slowly started to change. The boxes got unpacked, and I bought mismatched mugs from a thrift store, a second-hand armchair, a plant I wasn't sure how to take care of but wanted to try anyway. I stopped turning my phone face down out of habit. Some nights were hard. Loneliness has a way of knocking the air out of you when you least expect it. But there was also a strange beauty in it. In cooking for one, in walking home without anyone waiting, in realizing I could fill my own space without apology. And when I thought back on her, on us, it stopped hurting in the same way. Not because I'd forgiven everything, but because I'd stopped needing to carry it with me everywhere. I learned that letting go isn't one big decision. It's 1,000 small ones. Choosing every day not to reopen the wound, not to go back to the places that broke you, not to keep your life on pause in case they change their mind. And maybe the biggest thing I learned is this. Boundaries aren't walls you build to keep people out. They're doors you close to protect the parts of yourself you can't afford to lose again. I don't know if she ever realized what she did. I don't know if she cares. I don't know if, somewhere in her life now, she tells someone the story of the man who used to be her husband. But I do know this. I'm not a ghost anymore. I'm here. I'm whole, even in the places that still ache. And that's more than I thought I'd have when I first walked out of that apartment.